are you carrying all those bricks for? God? Is that it? God? Well, I tell you, let me give you a little inside information about God.
Soylent Green is made from people.
Happy heresies, my beloved true seekers, free thinkers, and psychic detectives of all that is possible and all that is impossible. Welcome so much to Aeon Byte, a district of the virtual Alexandria where the metaphysical east meets west, where all roads of imagination, esoterica, and mysticism converge into the potential of true annexation from all that is toxically unreal, all that is coated with suffering, and all that impedes us to consult our own internal oracle of Adelphi, where the indwelling logos resides and whispers to us, know thyself.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
I am Abraxas, the terrible god above god as the Gnostic sage Basilides recognized him centuries ago in the material Alexandria, and your psychopomp in this dark odyssey between the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy through the seas of fate and that dream of you. This is your life. Don't play hard to get. But maybe you're not playing hard to get. Maybe you're truly searching, but the weight of the world is always on your shoulders as you try to croak prayers to the divine or squint to gain a glimpse of the endless elucidating candlelight of the pleroma. And you just can't shrug like Atlas. You can't break the chains of Zeus while the vultures of society eat your sanity liver every day. You just can't roll that Sisyphus boulder of comparison, cultural demands, and cream froth goals that have been in your way ever since you lost that sense of wonder after the first time your heart was broken, your artistic spine snapped, and your dreams date raped by a cynical mocking world. And that might have been lifetimes ago.
Go ahead and run! Run home and cry to mama!
And most of the blame gestates from the cosmic or personal ego, perhaps one and the same, perhaps not, perhaps a little of both. Whether you view it psychologically or spiritually, it all comes to the same hill of fava beans and tears of Chianti. And this entity, this principle, this dude in the wheel in the sky goes by many names, my beloved true seekers. He is known as the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, Sakla, Samael, Indra, Allah, Zebra, Ahriman, the Architect, Urizen, the Artifact, the man behind the curtain, or the man in the mirror. His name doesn't really matter. Call him Krom if it gives you an anchor to his essence.
Maybe he's anti-God, bringing darkness instead of light.
But here at Aeon Byte, we playfully call this unbalanced force of the cosmos Jehovah. And we've certainly dealt with the old man in many a program and many an angle with many a guess. We've studied the cosmocrator through the microscope, periscope, and telescope of Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, and other Jewish mysticism, as well as medieval occultists, Sufism, dry scholarly analysis, Oriental and postmodern theology, and many other ways. We've diagnosed Jehovah and the myriad theories surrounding him with philosophy, anthropology, history, sociology, and metaphysics. But on this approximately Saturday, July 11th, 2009, maybe it's time we took him literally. And I think the reason centers around two comments Joseph Campbell once made. In our religion, everything is prosaic and very, very serious. You can't fool around with Jehovah. And the other one is, one problem with Jehovah, as they used to say in the old Christian Gnostic texts, is that he forgot he was a metaphor. He thought he was a fact. And when he said, I am God, a voice was heard to say, you are mistaken, Samael, which means blind God. He was blind to the infinite light of which he is a local historical manifestation. This is known as the blasphemy of Jehovah, that he thought he was God.
God's so smart, like Jeopardy smart.
And what I'm saying is that despite our greatest of efforts, the Demiurge is almost always in charge, above, below, and within. You may make a conscious choice to tear up the contracts of the old gods, perhaps embrace the occult or atheism, but that doesn't mean that subconsciously their avatars still hold infernal court inside your subconscious. That does not mean you will not remain dogmatic, literal, and, like Samael, blind to the infinite light Joseph Campbell spoke about. No matter how advanced, evolved, or closer to the palm tree garden we've come, each of us can turn into little Jehovahs at a moment's notice. We think we are the story instead of the living metaphors, symbols, and allegories that make us transparent to the transcendent. We often forget that literalism has been implanted in us like one of those bugs from the Wrath of Khan, and that a simple choice is not enough. It's a long process in breaking the counterfeit spirit the Gnostics wrote about, and the best way is to understand and be reminded of our Father in heaven in every aspect until we can finally remind Him that we, like Him, are but outcasts of the true source that have more important things to do than control the universe or the little universes around our lives.
You ask me if I have a God complex? Let me tell you something. I am God.
So thus we take Jehovah on his own turf of literalism as another route. And another important reason is so that we may counter those who still cling to a Bronze Age God and a Bronze Age mentality in a world of technology and nuclear missiles pointing at your nearest GameStop. If orthodoxy in all its Abrahamic incarnations and its long list of crimes that truly emulate the character of Jehovah in the OT will not at least try on the allegorical Platonic sunglasses of the Gnostics and their brethren in esoterica, and I doubt they will, then perhaps putting the half-maker on trial in the light of modern sensibilities over and over again might soften their hearts like he should have done to the Pharaoh from the beginning.
Pharaoh of Egypt, you have not yet obeyed the Lord. Let my people go.
And today's astral guest certainly makes an excellent prosecutor in his book, Jumping Jehovah, exposing the atrocities of the Old Testament God. And this is Paul Tice, Gnostic priest, author, editor, and owner of thebooktree.com, one of the greatest commissaries for almost impossible to find arcane works from all faiths and times. It's a pleasure to have Paul for a third time as well. His first two appearances, Paul spoke of the wonders of gnosis and human consciousness, but now he throws down the gauntlet. In this Eternal Now, he speaks about a book he wrote over a decade ago and is actually his best-selling work. Barely hitting 100 pages, Jumping Jehovah is a slam-dunk case against the many crimes against humanity of the Demiurge, as well as a provocative evidence on his lack of omnipotence, omniscience, and basically divine pedigree.
Jesus, why does God hate me?
Huh? He doesn't hate you. He hates me. He's gonna let me be crucified again.
He hates me more. He doesn't answer my prayers.
Without drawing from the Gnostic spirit and seasoning his lawsuit with plenty of parody and humor, Paul disrobes the Lord of Hosts as an archon, a petty ruler of the multiverse, and not the one Plato wrote about. And at the back of the book he references each character flaw and dereliction of the Lord. Although many of you are already familiar with the brutishness of this volcanic god, you'll be refreshed here and probably learn iniquities and absurdities you've never heard before or never thought of looking at from a pop and fresh angle.
In light of the resurrection of God's holy prophets, we are recanting our support and declaring you a heretic.
Yes, it's a short book, but we only cover a fraction in our interview. Because like Henry L. Mencken once wrote, the Old Testament, as everyone who has looked into it is aware, drips with blood. There is indeed no more bloody chronicle in all the literature of the world. Wonder if Henry ever got to read American Psycho. Who knows? Remember, my beloved truth seekers, we're fighting literalism with literalism. We're fighting hellfire with hellfire this once on Aeon Byte. To wit and repeat, It's another important way to exorcise the worst demons of our nature if we are truly to walk in light, spread light, and eventually become light. It's nothing novel since once upon a time, some ancient Jews that later would become the Gnostics, Hermeticists, and Kabbalists figured this out and took the route of myth, symbolism, magic, and, yes, metaphor.
What's God? Well, you know, when you want something really bad and you close your eyes and you wish for it, God's the guy that ignores you.
There are countless secularist websites that mock Yaldabaoth and his laws out there from a modern perspective, like, let's say, infidels.org or whatnot. And I'm sure many of you have your favorite biblical mythos that keep you grounded and disturbed at the same time. But let me have some fun by pointing out some of my favorite shenanigans of Jehovah in the Old Testament.
And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife. Now, where the hell did she come from? Who? Mrs. Cain.
The one I can never figure out through the Gestapo campaigns of Moses and Joshua was, why did they always have to kill all the livestock? Bad military decision and just plain mean-spirited. Where was PETA and their secret time machine? And the story of Onan in Genesis 38 always gives me a twisted chuckle. Poor guy is forced to marry his sister's wife, but doesn't want any more mouths to feed. So he performs a little ancient coitus interruptus on her and gets immediately zapped in his tent by the infinite creator of the universe. Poor Onan left by coming. On a larger scale, not to mention the countless medium slayings in between, Jehovah wipes out 50,070 men of Beth-Shemesh in one of his moods in 1 Samuel 6. He tops that a little later when David screws up by taking a census and the 70,000 Israelites are put down like unwanted dogs. And the mass murder goes on when you consider the historically unverifiable genocide of the Hittites, Amorites, Jebusites, Canaanites, and Philistines that somehow and mysteriously often appear later in the Bible.
If there is a God, he did not mean this to be so.
And again, all the poor animals are put to death. Always the poor animals. But the single biggest slaughter by the demiurge is in 2 Chronicles 14, when he kills 1 million Ethiopians. Yes, that's 1 million people at once. Now that's showing your godly muscle. Forget about weaving nebulas or forming stars. Both Skynet and Emperor Ming would be proud of his modus operandi. And Paul brings even more, again including, like Jung wrote in answer to Job, Jehovah's propensity for forgetting to consult his own omniscience.
I am the Supreme Being. I'm not entirely dim.
It's just time to exercise this Bronze Age mentality ingrained in Western culture, like psychic rabies, the body count, the repression of man's imaginative elan, and the suspension of reason has to stop, or we'll get another 2,000 years of molar grinding conflict.
The Lord of hosts will do battle for us. Behold his mighty hand.
Once there was a lonely God roaming above the waters of creation after being given birth by Sophia. Now we've got billions of potential Jehovahs ready to make the doctrine of hell a reality on earth itself. Or maybe that already happened. The empire never ended.
And on the 3rd day, God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals. Amen.
This program will hopefully continue to cleanse the remnants of spiritual decay in the bowels of your higher self. Sorry, old man. Just like we can't forget Sophia and indwelling Christ in our daily tests, we can't forget you and your Fannie Mae mismanagement of reality. And like the Valentinians and the Talmud and the Zohar agree, you can be redeemed like each one of us. So what say you, Yaldabaoth? Maybe it's time you accepted you were a metaphor like those of us who have awoken, and we can work together to heal this poorly designed holographic universe projected on the canvas of creation and inside our own hearts. Or as you keep barking that you are a jealous God and there is no God but you, although we are all gods in the becoming, we'll have to remind you of what William Blake once wrote. Listen to the fool's reproach. It is a kingly title. Paul Tice and I will be waiting for your answer.
Blasphemers, idolaters, for this you shall drink bitter waters. God has set before you this day his laws of life and good and death and evil. Those who will not live by the law shall die by the law.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us today we have the pleasure of having back Paul Tice, this time to discuss his book, Jumping Jehovah. How are you doing today, Paul?
Hey, we're doing great today, Miguel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming back and discussing this tongue-in-cheek yet serious book. First of all, why did you decide to write this book, and how do you counter your more literalistic critics who might throw the famous or infamous anti-Semitic charge at you?
It was probably just over a quarter century ago when I decided that I would read the Bible front cover to back cover rather, and I was in the Old Testament area actually, and it just didn't seem quite right that what I had been taught about a loving God, it just didn't jibe with all the atrocities and cruelties that I was coming across. And I had an experience during my reading of the Bible, which was a very profound experience. I talked about it on a different show, which brought me into another realm, and I had just a consciousness change, and it was an experience that was basically what to me God should be. And I was at the exact point in my life where there was a juxtaposition there of, what an experience of God in a most powerful way would be like. And then here I am reading this stuff in the Old Testament. So less than a year later, I took off across the country and moved to Los Angeles, and I began to pursue these questions a bit more deeply. I spent some time going to Dr. Stefan Heller's Gnostic church in Hollywood, California, and for about 2.5 years I'd listened to his Friday night lectures, and there was just no other path whatsoever as far as God goes, and experiencing God rather than being told what to believe by an Old Testament, which is far outdated. We're no longer a bunch of nomads running through the desert that have as many barbaric tendencies as they had. We don't have that anymore, and times have changed. Our conception of God has changed, and it just became time to speak out in some way, and I had to write the book. And now, as far as the anti-Semitic things go, there's a lot of people who will level that charge. I have family members who've married into Jewish families, and I've integrated myself into the Jewish family life, and I've had relationships with a number of Jewish people on levels of friendship, and I've never had an enemy who is a Jewish person. I can't say I've even had very many enemies in my life at all, if not any at all. So, but I don't have a problem with Jewish people. I love them all, and they're fine and good by me. It's their God I have a problem with. I felt it was time to say something, and I wrote the book with some humor, too, to lighten things up a bit, because I don't feel it's right to, attack things in a vicious way. I mean, you're making a point, and you want to make it so that people understand it, but you also don't want to be vindictive and come off as mean-hearted and mean-spirited, because we're trying to be the exact opposite of that, yet at the same time point out what we have been witnessing and experiencing from reading the Old Testament. So that's basically how it all came about.
Paul, before we get into Jehovah, and to maybe put things in context for those who are still clinging literally to the Old Testament, didn't the Bronze Age man basically have a different view of what a god was? It seems from your book and from other research that they saw them simply as superhuman extraterrestrial beings.
Our concept of God has definitely changed. Early man was more superstitious. What we have to establish, however, is who Jehovah really was and who these early gods were. We were more connected with nature back then, and so it was very important for us to have deities that would bless the crops and bring rain and things like that. A lot of times, and I would think maybe in Jehovah's case, that it was personified through a powerful warlord or something like that. Early man's view of God was definitely different. You know, there was a lot of gods back then too. There wasn't just the worship of one god. The superhuman parts of that were connected, I think, more directly with nature. But when Jehovah came along, all that seemed to change.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't, as your book points out, Jehovah basically might have been a volcanic god or a storm god to begin with, a minor god of many other gods with Baal and El and other gods who are superior than him?
Exactly. And also there were, goddesses at the same time that were even more popular than he was. In trying to establish who he was, I mean, originally he was a storm god. He was a god that was connected to thunder and lightning and, and a bit with volcanism, the volcanoes and things like that. Again, there's that connection with nature that all the early gods seem to have a connection to in a certain aspect for each one.
And back then, man definitely saw the gods as having, again, the whole superhuman thing. And didn't Jehovah basically have human qualities? I mean, he had a biology at first.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is what we need to do is establish exactly who Jehovah was. That really makes, and by the way, Yahweh is the name that's mentioned in the Bible, but I just want to make it clear for those most probably already know, but the names are interchangeable. I use Jehovah, but the Bible uses Yahweh, but it's one and the same, and so when you reference this in the Bible, that's what you'll find is Yahweh. But what we've got is, in establishing who he is, I mean, you look at the Bible, and this is where things seem to change as far as nature gods go, because there's apologetics that I've debated with on the internet, and they're insisting that all of the things in the Bible, all of these atrocities and all of the things that are negative about Jehovah was simply a reflection of the society because it itself was so barbaric. But when you look into the Bible, you'll find all kinds of references in there where, Jehovah's anatomy is in the Bible. I mean, he's got, in various parts of the Bible, they discuss his face and his ears and his feet, his arms, his head, his mouth, even his nostrils and his tongue. All of those Bible passages are referenced in my book, Jump in Jehovah, Exposing the Atrocities of the Old Testament God. There's also references in there about him having a physical form, making an appearance in a physical form. A lot of those references are in Genesis, and in Exodus 19:11, he was in sight of all the people. In Exodus 33:9, he was seen face to face. There's a lot of references in the Bible that point to him as being an actual physical person. Then, when you go on from there, you find that this entity in human form has these extra qualities, these powerful qualities and powers. He was really very, he wasn't nice to his people, and he used these powers and endless references in the Bible of punishments and things like that, and killing people with lightning and plagues and fire and things like that, and his own people. These are his followers, and I just want to backtrack for a second and say that the Jewish people, I actually care about them more than many other people, because deep within their psyches, they've got a situation where such a terrible God who brutalized them in the past, and whether it was a physical being or not, this is within their culture. I feel for them because the Jewish people have been persecuted throughout their entire history, and it's a real shame, because I think that when you go back to the early times of Jehovah, all this has been deeply rooted into their psyches, and this is much like growing up with an abusive parent,
right,
who beats the crap out of you every day, and then you end up going out into the world, out into school, and the other people pick up on that, and they beat the crap out of the kid in school, and this and that. I mean, throughout the Jewish people's history, they've been persecuted so very badly. And I think it's time for a new God. It's time for a new loving God. It's high time we move beyond all this, because it's, when you look at the Old Testament, it's just such persecution. And so what got me onto that track a little bit was the fact that these are his own people.
Yeah, and like you point out, Paul, it's not like, the Bible talks about covenants, but basically it was a one-sided covenant. He said, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. And he broke his own covenant pretty much many times. I mean, nobody breaks the Ten Commandments more than Jehovah, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, he seemed to have these powers, and it frightened the heck out of his people. And there was a certain point in the Bible where they say that we were better off as slaves. We were better off in Egypt as slaves. Actually, they were still slaves, but they were now Jehovah's slaves because of that covenant. That definitely, when Jehovah mentions the covenant, he says that this is my covenant. And when you look up the word covenant in the dictionary, you will find that it says that it's when two parties agree on something. The covenant that we find in the Old Testament was not, by the proper terms, a covenant. It was just pure blackmail. He says, if you don't follow my covenant, I will, set plagues upon you, and all of these endless threats about what he would do to them if they violate the covenant. And again, he says my covenant. He doesn't say our covenant. So these powers could be used, and they were used often, and that kept them enslaved. But yet, they had just been led out of Egypt, and they were in a different area, but they were still under the dominion of another entity.
But tell us, Paul, what was the evolution of Jehovah? How did he work his way out from a minor tribal god to a mafia-type greater god that would dominate Palestine and later the Western world?
When you are in charge of a certain people or a group, the first thing you do is establish your dominance. First claim that he was the God and the creator God. So, let's have no question about that. Hey, people, I am your God. I am the creator. He was so possessive of his people and, jealous of other gods. He said that, basically, I am the God. So, first off, you have to establish that. From that point on, you've got the people who are, understanding that either he is, or you better believe it, or else. So, what we've had is a lot of different tribes who were just wandering around, raising cattle and everything. And, the early Israelites, they still worshipped many gods simultaneously, and especially Baal, because Baal was very connected with the fertility of the fields and, the herds and things like that, because, Jehovah, as we said earlier, was a storm god. A lot of these people were still connected with nature, and, Jehovah first got going a bit with the northern tribes in Israel. It took a couple of centuries, really, but this alliance that was made with Jehovah was made because they became aggressive, and they started to bring more tribes in, and as more tribes were brought together, then, their power increased, and soon many of the other tribes realized, it would be to their advantage, it would be advantageous to be part of this. They just basically wanted more land to raise their cattle. It was important for their own security and protection once this group of Jehovah followers became bigger. If they don't become part of the group, then you're exposed to a lot of problems, and possibly violent tendencies of this group would make you a target. So it seemed that Jehovah, being an angry war god and bringing starting to move around and become very aggressive in its ways, this group had to be joined, basically almost like a protection racket, the way the mafia operates.
And Paul, tell us some of the atrocities, at least the ones that really stick to your mind, that he commits against his own people, who, like you say, he basically acts like some mad dictator most of the time, very unstable. So why don't we start with how he mistreated Judaism's greatest patriarch, Moses? I mean, he didn't treat him like a very good capo, did he?
Not at all. For a while, everything seemed to be going okay as long as Moses did what was expected of him. They were promised that they would get into the Promised Land, and under Moses' leadership, and it was, just almost like 40 years in the desert of pure hell and fighting all of these different tribes, and there were a lot of casualties. There was starvation. The food was of course terrible. I mean, this was not a vacation. I mean, this was a terrible time out in the desert of struggling. And Moses was the leader, and this was his life, to serve his God, and it was an honor to him. What we've got is what I call Jehovah's Advanced Leadership Program. It wasn't a very good program. I mean, here you've got the Israelites that are wanting to enter into Canaan and get into the Promised Land. You've got both Moses and Aaron. Aaron was like almost Moses' partner, but slightly underling to him. We find that in Canaan, they found that it was too risky to try and go in there at the time. Jehovah decided that they were going to wait for the next generation to become a little bit stronger. They finally, reached that point where they were going to, be going in, and here they are at Canaan's doorstep. What happens is that Moses is just basically shoved aside because
because he hits a rock with his stick and takes claim for it. I think that's excuse, isn't it?
They were in this desert, and everyone was really thirsty, and they're very close to getting into the Promised Land, and Jehovah tells Moses and Aaron to hit a certain rock with a rod, and that water will come out. And so Moses goes to strike the rock, and he addresses the people. He says, "Shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And he does strike the rock, and lo and behold, the water comes out. But Moses had put this in the form of a question. He said, "Shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And because it was in the form of a question, Jehovah interpreted that as, "Oh, ye with so little faith," and he punished both Moses and Aaron for not trusting in his power enough. And that's when he excluded them from going into the Promised Land. First off, Jehovah uses Moses and has him bring Aaron and Aaron's son up to the top of a mountain, and Moses strips Aaron of his clothes and puts them on his son, and then leaves him there naked to die on the mountain, which happened. So much for being Jehovah's faithful servant, as I mentioned in the book, but Moses as well. I mean, it goes through so many military battles, but then basically he's left out of the promised land. And this is, it's just, usually when somebody is, serves with a company or any kind of a military position, I mean, you're given honors. Basically, he was just shoved aside. Moses was just shoved aside, and that was the end of it. So it's just no compassion. It's definitely a major atrocity. I can't imagine what someone would feel like if they were in Moses' place. And Moses even had a little something to say about that too.
What other atrocities are some of your favorite, or should I say least favorite?
One of the ones which comes to mind is, when he basically takes about 250 of people who are thinking twice about the whole situation, just roasted these people alive. This was when we had the Reubenite faction, and there was two people named Dathan and Abraham, and they had gathered together about 250 of the most esteemed Israelites. They, had questions for Aaron and Moses. There was also the leader of this group was called Korah. All of these three people, Korah, Dathan, and Abraham, were called to appear before Jehovah for a hearing. But it wasn't really a hearing at all. It was like a sentencing where basically Jehovah were just roasted in front of all of the other Israelites as a clear message to not even think about opposing anything that was going on. And then there's other parts of the Bible where like in Numbers 17:11, there's 14,700 people that he killed with a plague, and these are his chosen people. There was, in the back of Jumpin' Jehovah, I've got a listing there of all of the different biblical references that outline the atrocities and all the strange things that you can find in the Bible about Jehovah that will clearly tell you that this was not what God really should be. There's just so many of these examples that it's hard to keep track of them all, basically. I mean, there was one where there was a man named Elisha, and he was one of Jehovah's prophets. Some children were just teasing him, and what happens is basically two bears suddenly appear in the name of Jehovah and maul and kill 42 children. And this is in the Bible in 2 Kings. It just doesn't really make much sense for an entity who's supposed to be God to be treating his own in this fashion. It's just throughout the Bible.
Yeah, I think in one point you quote Euripides that says, "If any god commits evil, then he is not a god." But as you refer to Jehovah, more of a demon than anything.
Yeah, and there's one guy who just went out and picked up sticks on the Sabbath, and this is in Numbers 15:32, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. Well, this guy went out and picked up a few sticks, and he was ordered stoned to death by the entire tribe. I mean, this is like, what is going on here? This is like mentally deranged stuff. I mean, we wouldn't think of doing anything like this today. If one of your family members was to act in this way, you'd immediately get him institutionalized. You would get him help of some kind, and he'd probably be in a mental institution instead of being worshipped as a god. You wouldn't worship somebody these days as a god who does this kind of stuff. It doesn't jibe well with a true religious and spiritual attitude.
Yeah, and one point that a lot of people miss in the whole Exodus thing is you've got Jehovah saying he's going to save his people after, leaving them for hundreds of years in slavery. But this was all a setup, wasn't it, Paul? Because what he did, he hardened Pharaoh's heart in order to set up his chance to show his power, right?
I've got a pretty big, long passage in the book that just shows how over and over again you've got Jehovah hardening the heart of the Pharaoh after, of course, allowing him to inflict atrocities on the Egyptians, and then the Pharaoh would agree to, oh yeah, well, I don't want any of this. This is too much for me. We're going to set the Israelites free. But then each time the Jehovah would harden his heart so he could come in and slam them with another plague or another infestation of something, either frogs or lice or the whole gamut of just terrible things. And despite the cruelties involved, it's a comedy of errors. It's like errors on the part of Jehovah in moral conduct. This is just like crazy. This guy, Jehovah was supposed to be the creator of the universe, and yet here he is using frogs to, impress people and cause trouble for a country. And, I ask in the book, well, if you were, the creator of the universe, wouldn't you use frogs too? This is crazy. This is crazy stuff. And yet, because it's religion, people kind of blindly go along and say, well, it's in the Bible. We got to start questioning these things. This is not the way that we need to continue modeling our lives after, because this stuff is just, it's so incredibly spiritually bankrupt that we have to start looking at this very seriously once again.
Jehovah certainly, as you point out, again, in the back of your book, you show a detailed passages for anybody to see, but he was far from omnipotent, wasn't he? I think, again, another thing we just accept is a passage in the Bible where Jacob is wrestling with a so-called angel. But as you point out, the truth is that he was really wrestling with Jehovah, wasn't he?
Well, I would go one step further. I think he was wrestling with a demon who was, in fact, Jehovah. That's a pretty heavy statement, but I get into this, and this is something that when you look at this part of the Bible very closely, like this is in Genesis 32:24. It says that Jacob wrestled with some sort of supernatural entity. And, it's first in verse 24, he first refers to it as a man, but then he also says, I have seen God face to face as well, and said, and because of that, my life is preserved. So, Jacob is claiming he wrestled with God, and he won. So, what does that tell you about Jehovah being all-powerful? Just some guy off the street named, Jacob happened to wrestle with him and beat him. He held him fast, and and here it is, and he's got him pinned. Okay, this is like a wrestling match with God, and you've got God pinned down. But demons in that day, if you were to get the name of a demon, you had power over him. This is something that that Jehovah was concerned about, and also he's got him pinned, and this entity, and I say it's Jehovah, says, let me go, for the day breaketh. It was commonly believed back then that demons were robbed of their powers by the light of dawn, almost like a vampire, but that's what, that's what demons were afraid of, was that, was a real concern. The reason why Jacob was not 100% sure that this was God, because this entity attempted to conceal his identity when Jacob asked for his name. Because, once again, what I was saying before is if you get possession of a demon's name, you gain power over him. And so there's all these clues in there. Although Jacob claims it was God, it could very well have either been, number one, Jehovah is exposed here as a low-level pretender god or a demon being unmasked for who he really is. Or second, Jacob has mistaken an insignificant demon for Jehovah. I tend to believe that that Jehovah was, in fact, more of a demonic entity than a god. And, Jehovah does take credit for the evils in the world. And back at that time, there was no Satan. Satan first appears in the Bible, and scholars have estimated that when that was written, the first appearance of Satan is 800 years later, after the time Jehovah, or after the time that those passages concerning Jehovah were written.
Yeah, and it's pretty apparent in the Old Testament that there's several passages where Jehovah claims, he is the source of all evil. He's the one who put lying spirits in Saul and all these other things. I mean, in ancient times, he was the boss, and that's all there was to it.
Yeah, and so there was no need for a devil back then because all the evil and cruel things were attributed to God. He was all things back then, and but very little of it was good. There's very little found in the Old Testament that was not cruel and vindictive treatment of his own people and others. And there is some, but there isn't that much really.
You show there's lots of other passages in which he shows himself to be less than omnipotent, but he also reveals that he is far less than omniscient, and often a self-serving liar. Could you give us an example? I think the main one you say is that he had to create a rainbow to remind himself not to destroy mankind.
Yeah, that was crazy. This is in Genesis 9, and he had just basically it was after the flood, and he wanted an everlasting covenant, and basically he says, and the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. I just don't understand why, he would take credit for creating a rainbow, because the earth was here for millions of years before Jehovah came along, and all of a sudden, there's always been rain on the earth, and rainbows are a natural occurrence, as we know in this day and age. We scientifically have figured out where rainbows come from since the time of the Old Testament, but Jehovah was quick to take credit for it and say, well, I've made this rainbow as a reminder, and but it just really irks me to say that, if he gets ready to do another great flood and he's ready in all of his rage to kill millions of people, that he needs a rainbow to remind him that, oh, wait a minute, there's that rainbow. I better not kill these millions of people. I mean, is this guy stupid or what, Well, how about just a Post-it note, Man, it's like, so yeah, we've got a lot of really weird things going on that relate to the superstitious mindset that was back then. That we've definitely transcended that, and worshiping an entity that is kind of slow in his actions. As far as he was just very, very spontaneously angry at very, very often.
Western culture simply accepts Genesis as the majestic creation story and the reason of the fall of man. What are some of the inconsistencies you found when you were writing your book, some that actually play into the Gnostic hands, like Eve, the serpent, and the tree of knowledge?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas because, the so-called fall of man is, I feel that's a whole area where we're trying to get guilt laid onto us. I don't believe we ever fell. I think that when we were in the Garden of Eden and we were basically blinded, we were not conscious in the way that we are conscious now. We were simply workers. We were there to do the work for God, and our job was not to think. What was really interesting is that we have, Eve, who's been told that if they eat of the fruit, or if they even touch the fruit, they would die. So then you've got the serpent coming along. The serpent is basically tells them the opposite. He says, basically, you will not die. In fact, your eyes will be open, and you will, be like the gods. We've got to figure who was really telling the truth here. Jehovah was certainly not, because they ate the fruit, their eyes were opened, and they were like gods. wisdom is a great thing, and we achieve that in the Garden of Eden, and to attribute that to being sin or to being sinful is wrong, because even Jesus once said, "Be ye wise as serpents," and that's in Matthew 10:16, I believe. And in countries throughout the world, other than Judeo-Christianity, the serpent is revered and honored. So somewhere along the line, we flipped it, and so our fall it was an upliftment to a certain degree, and we were banned from the garden. And one of my favorite people is Robert Ingersoll, who said, "Banish me from Eden when you will, but first let me eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge." I get into a section in the book about knowledge and how the church has repressed knowledge over the centuries, whereby, we went into the Dark Ages, and just as we were going in, there were so many libraries that were burned and so many important documents. And, I give an example of navigation and the circumference of the earth, and knowing the way that the earth was round, and knowing how to travel, and all that was lost. We once knew that. We knew all that stuff, but that's just one example of stuff that, it took another 800 years to catch up and regain all of this and relearn all of this stuff. And because the church wanted you to depend on them, a lot of the major knowledge of this world has continually been repressed by the church. And what my belief is that it's the elevation of knowledge which is the reason that we're here. I mean, the elevation of knowledge is the greatest gift to mankind that we have ever had. So back in the Garden of Eden, we were not supposed to involve ourselves with knowledge or eat of that fruit. And yet our eyes were opened and we became like gods. And since then, we have been striving to become more and more like the gods, whoever they really were. But we have, all of our progress is based on this incredible knowledge and our potential that's within our minds. We have an amazing, spiritual and intellectual potential. I find it to be very interesting that our culture is one that wants to repress that. I mean, a lot of people are very happy to just go along to get along, do what you're told, just listen to what the powers that be want, and, all of that stuff. But it's amazing that I end that section in my book. I'll just read the last paragraph here. "The spread of intelligence throughout the masses has been the crowning achievement of mankind and had to be fought for with blood and passion before it could happen. The spread of intelligence has done more for humanity than all the superstitions and falsehoods that have been spread by priests and prophets." And because when you go through church history, you've got Galileo, who was forced to recant under the threat of death because of his scientific breakthroughs about the orbits of the planets. And throughout history, the church has put up bitter opposition to all fields: astronomy, geology, biology, paleontology, evolution. At various times, the church has banned or prevented the investigation or practice of medicine, surgery, anesthetics, agriculture, the census, printing, gravitation around Earth, the heliocentric system, geography in general, and a host of other things. So, it's a pattern that we've been put ourselves into because of the fall of man. We supposedly fell, and it was a bad thing to receive knowledge or have the ability to have wisdom and to be like the gods. And getting back to Jehovah, as far as who was really lying, the serpent told the truth. I would say that was a gift. You've got Jehovah, who actually was trying to repress that, and I don't understand why, if we are his creations, if he created the universe and he is our creator, why would he not want to have a creation that is brilliant and, advancing intellectually and spiritually. And wouldn't that be the crowning achievement of a great creator God? I don't understand why we would just simply want to remain as repressed slaves in a garden and do nothing but, live a blind existence.
Yeah, exactly. And, of course, why would he plant the 2 trees in the first place to begin with? It just seems like another one of his many mistakes, And another thing also, lacking his omniscience, he doesn't even recognize Adam after he eats the fruit.
Yeah.
So it's just like you said, it's almost like a comedy of errors when you look at the Old Testament, with Jehovah just fumbling and bumbling and again some misguided mafia guy hiding his tracks by killing off people.
It really is questionable when you look at the reasons why a God would actually make the conditions possible for humanity to fail in such a miserable way. I mean, if you're going to put a tree in this garden and say, don't eat it, if you're all-knowing, well, you're going to know they're going to eat it anyway, and then they're going to fall, and then you're going to get kicked out, and then you're going to be treated terribly because you've, quote-unquote, fallen. And so all-knowing, I don't think so. I think that he kind of thought, when you look at Jehovah's mindset, I mean, he was constantly setting up situations for people to fall into a trap and to fail, so he could enact his vengeance upon them. I mean, this was a very mean-spirited entity. And again, I don't believe that it was just a reflection of the culture. I think that in part it could have been, but I think that because of the physical descriptions of Jehovah, I think that there was a powerful warlord with some kind of unusual powers, or a series of them that, almost like the Bush family. I don't know. You get these series of leaders that, much like a presidency, they'll carry things down, and sometimes situations can not be the most pleasant. Way back when all this was going on, it was very barbaric. It was truly an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth back then, for sure, in a major way. I mean, Jehovah would say, if you don't follow my commandments, I will curse you for, 7 generations following. But if you, follow my commandments, well, guess what? I'll bestow gifts upon you and the next generation after that, 1 generation. So apparently did he actually, have 7 times more hatred than he did, gratitude? I mean, that was something that you have to question.
And to end, Paul, you offer in your book a challenge of Jehovah showing some kindness in the Pentateuch, and that you haven't had a response in 10 years. How goes it so far?
The phone lines are mysteriously dead. I keep checking the phone lines and trying to see if this the board is going to light up, but still we haven't gotten that the initial call that might open those floodgates. But no, not a thing. I got an angry 6-page letter from a preacher up in Canada, and ranting and raving all the way through, and yet nothing. I mean, it was just a reflection of the Jehovistic mindset, basically. I was hoping that was going to be there was going to be something in that one, but nothing. And the whole purpose of the letter was to try to refute the book, and yet there was no evidence. It was just all a big, theatrical, angry, exposition, and it did remind me. It seemed to be a reflection of the Jehovah mindset. And so, as I understand it, there are a couple instances in there where Jehovah actually showed a little softness.
Wow.
There may be 1 or 2, and so I'm waiting for somebody to just to stick up for Jehovah, but it's just not. There's so much against nobody's going to stick their neck out. I don't think anybody's that stupid. And then the next thing they need to do is just, if they've really thought about this, let's move on with a different way of expressing ourselves as, spiritual beings and that sort of thing.
Well said. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Once again, Paul, thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and giving us some of your wisdom.
Well, if you want a copy of Jumpin' Jehovah, you can call our 800 number or go to the Booktree's website, and it's www.thebooktree.com. And our 1-800 number will send you a free catalog. We send a free catalog to anybody who asks for it, anywhere in the world. It's a 1-800-700-TREE. Once again, 1-800-700-8733. And I really appreciate you having me on again. It's been fun. There's so many other points that I wanted to cover and wasn't able to. So anybody that wants more information, get in touch, and we'll go from there.
Yes, I agree. It's a small book, but it's packed with information and a great book to carry around if you ever run into a fundamentalist and you just want to break it all down.
Yeah, I know a friend of mine bought about 50 copies and sent them to the Jehovah Witness, main headquarters in New York, and he was an ex-Jehovah Witness, and it was his way of revenge, I guess. I don't know, or else just trying to let people know about what witnesses might want to know instead of just what they've been told to believe. So who knows?
All right, Paul. Well, once again, thank you very much, and have yourself a good day.
Okay, thanks again.